Most people think loneliness is something you need to fix or get rid of as fast as possible. But what if I told you that some of the greatest artists, writers, and creators in history used their loneliness as the exact thing that made them successful? What if the feeling you're trying to escape is actually the key to unlocking something incredible inside you? Look, I get it. Loneliness sucks. It's that heavy feeling in your chest when you're scrolling through social media at 2 a.m. watching everyone else live their best lives while you're sitting there wondering why you feel so disconnected from everything. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. Loneliness isn't just some random bad emotion that ruins your day. It's actually trying to tell you something important. And once you understand what that message is, you can use it to create things you never thought possible. Today, we're going to break down exactly how you can transform that lonely feeling into creative energy. Not in some fake positive thinking way, but in a real practical way that actually works. We're talking about the psychology behind why loneliness and creativity are connected, what happens in your brain when you're alone, and the specific steps you can take to channel those feelings into something meaningful. So let's talk about what loneliness actually is. Most people confuse being alone with being lonely, but they're completely different things. You can be surrounded by 100 people at a party and still feel lonely. You can also be completely by yourself for days and feel totally fine. Loneliness isn't about how many people are around you, it's about feeling disconnected or misunderstood. And here's where it gets interesting from a psychology perspective. When you feel lonely, your brain goes into this specific state. There's actual research on this. Scientists have found that loneliness triggers the same parts of your brain that physical pain does. That's why it hurts so much. Your brain is literally treating it like an injury. But there's another thing that happens. When you're lonely, your brain also becomes more alert and more sensitive to your environment. Think about it from an evolutionary standpoint. Way back when humans were living in caves and hunting animals, being separated from your group was dangerous. So your brain developed a system where loneliness makes you more aware, more observant, and more focused on your surroundings. It's trying to help you find your way back to safety. Now here's the cool part. That same heightened state of awareness is exactly what artists and creators tap into when they make their best work. You know that feeling when you're creating something and you're so focused that hours pass by without you noticing? That's a similar brain state to what loneliness triggers. Your mind becomes sharper, more observant, more tuned into details that other people miss. The problem is that most of us were taught to run away from loneliness. We were told to keep busy, go out more, make more friends, fill up our calendar. And yeah, human connection is important. We're social creatures. But when you're constantly running away from being alone with yourself, you never give your mind the space it needs to actually create something original. Think about your favorite musicians, writers, or artists. Most of them spent huge amounts of time alone, not because they were antisocial or weird, but because they needed that space to develop their ideas. Vincent van Gogh spent years in isolation creating his paintings. Emily Dickinson barely left her house but wrote almost 2,000 poems. David Bowie talked about how his most creative periods came when he was feeling the most isolated and disconnected from others. But here's the challenge. How do you actually use loneliness productively instead of just sitting there feeling bad about yourself? Because there's a difference between creative solitude and just being miserable. That's what we need to figure out. Let's start with understanding the different types of loneliness, because not all lonely feelings are the same. There's emotional loneliness, which is when you feel like nobody really understands you or gets what you're going through. There's social loneliness, which is just not having enough people to hang out with or talk to. And then there's this third type that psychologists call existential loneliness, which is this deeper feeling of being fundamentally alone in the universe, like everyone else is living in a different reality than you. That third type might sound depressing, but it's actually the most useful one for creativity, because when you feel existentially lonely, you start asking bigger questions. You start thinking about meaning and purpose and what really matters. You start noticing things about life that other people are too distracted to see. And all of that becomes material for creating something meaningful. So the first step in turning loneliness into creative fuel is to actually pay attention to what kind of loneliness you're experiencing. Don't just label it as "I feel bad" and try to make it go away. Sit with it for a minute. Ask yourself what specifically feels lonely right now. Is it that you want someone to talk to? Is it that you feel misunderstood? Is it something deeper? Once you identify what type of loneliness you're dealing with, you can start channeling it. Here's how that works. Let's say you're feeling emotionally lonely because you feel like nobody really understands what you're going through. Instead of just dwelling on that feeling, you can ask yourself, what would I want someone to understand about me? What do I wish I could communicate to someone else? And then you create something that expresses that. Write it down, draw it, make a video about it, turn it into a song, whatever your medium is. The key is that you're taking that feeling of not being understood and you're transforming it into an attempt to be understood. You're using the loneliness as motivation to communicate something that matters to you. And here's the magic part. When you do that, when you create something that comes from a genuine place of wanting to be understood, other people who feel the same way will connect with it. Because loneliness is universal. Everyone feels it sometimes. So when you express your specific version of it honestly, other lonely people recognize themselves in what you made. Let's talk about the practical psychology of how this works in your brain. When you're creating something, you're engaging a part of your brain called the default mode network. This is the network that becomes active when you're not focused on the outside world, when you're daydreaming or imagining or reflecting on yourself. And guess what? This same network is highly active when you're feeling lonely. So loneliness is literally pushing your brain into the exact mental state that you need for creative work. The problem is that most people fight against this state. They feel lonely, they feel their minds starting to wander and reflect, and they immediately grab their phone or turn on the TV or do anything to distract themselves from those feelings. But if you can learn to sit with that state instead of running from it, you can ride that wave into deep creative work.
Here's a technique that actually works. Next time you're feeling lonely, instead of immediately trying to fix it or distract yourself, give yourself permission to just be lonely for 30 minutes. Set a timer if you need to. During those 30 minutes, do something creative. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be anything you'll show anyone else. Just make something. Write whatever comes to mind. Draw random shapes. Play around with sounds or colors or words. The point is to let your brain stay in that reflective lonely state while giving it something productive to do. What usually happens is that after about 15 or 20 minutes, you'll notice the lonely feeling starts to transform. It doesn't necessarily go away completely, but it becomes less heavy. It becomes more like a companion than an enemy. You're still alone, but now you're alone and doing something that feels meaningful, and not a completely different experience than just being alone and feeling bad about it. Another important piece of this is understanding the difference between productive solitude and destructive isolation. Productive solitude is when you're alone and you're using that time to think, create, learn, or develop yourself in some way. Destructive isolation is when you're alone and you're just spiraling into negative thoughts, comparing yourself to others, or numbing yourself with distractions. The key difference is intentionality. Are you choosing to be alone for a reason, or are you alone because you're avoiding something? Are you doing something with your alone time, or are you just killing time until you're not alone anymore? This distinction matters because your brain can tell the difference. When you're intentionally alone and working on something, your brain releases dopamine and feels rewarded. When you're accidentally alone and wishing you weren't, your brain releases stress hormones and feels threatened. So part of turning loneliness into creative fuel is reframing how you think about being alone. Instead of, I'm lonely and that's bad, try thinking, I have space to create something right now. Instead of, nobody wants to hang out with me, try, I get to spend this time exactly how I want without having to compromise. It sounds simple, but this shift in perspective actually changes your brain chemistry. Studies show that how you interpret a situation affects your physiological response to it more than the situation itself does. Now let's talk about something that might sound counterintuitive. Sometimes the loneliest moments produce the most universally relatable creative work. Think about the saddest song you've ever heard, or the most emotionally powerful movie, or the book that made you feel less alone. Chances are it was created by someone who was feeling deeply lonely when they made it. Because when you're lonely, you're forced to go deep into your own experience. You can't rely on other people to validate your thoughts or tell you what's interesting. You have to trust your own instincts. And that's where originality comes from. Not from trying to be different or unique, but from being so honest about your own experience that you accidentally create something nobody else could have made. Other people can copy your style or your technique, but they can't copy what it feels like to be you. And loneliness forces you to explore what it feels like to be you because you don't have anyone else's perspective to hide behind. Here's the moment where everything clicks together. The real secret to turning loneliness into creative fuel isn't about making the loneliness go away. It's about changing your relationship with it. Instead of seeing loneliness as this enemy that you need to defeat, you start seeing it as a signal that you have something to express, to create something, to get something out of you that's been building up inside. Loneliness works the same way. It's your mind telling you you need to express something, to create something, to get something out of you that's been building up inside.
Every single time you feel lonely, you're sitting on top of creative energy that wants to come out. The question is whether you're going to channel it into something productive or just let it eat away at you. And I'm not saying you have to create a masterpiece every time you feel lonely. Sometimes it's just about journaling for 10 minutes. Sometimes it's about taking photos of whatever's around you. Sometimes it's about rearranging your room or trying to cook something new. The specific output doesn't matter as much as the act of transforming that internal feeling into external action. There's this concept in psychology called sublimation. It's when you take an uncomfortable feeling or desire and you transform it into something socially valuable or personally meaningful. That's exactly what we're talking about here. You're taking the uncomfortable feeling of loneliness and sublimating it into creative work. And the beautiful thing about this is that once you get good at it, you actually start to not fear loneliness anymore. You might even start to look forward to it a little bit because you know it's going to push you to create something. Some of the most successful creators in the world have talked about this. They'll block off entire days or weeks where they're completely alone with no distractions, no social media, no people. Not because they hate everyone, but because they know that's when their best ideas come out. They've learned to trust the process of being alone with themselves and letting whatever needs to come out actually come out. And here's what nobody tells you. Once you create something from a place of genuine loneliness and you put it out into the world, you'll often find that it connects with people more deeply than anything you made while trying to please others or fit in. You don't have to wait until the loneliness goes away to start creating. You can start right now, exactly as you are, feeling exactly what you feel. That's where the real work comes from anyway, not from being happy and comfortable all the time, but from being willing to transform whatever you're experiencing into something that exists outside of you. If this helped you see loneliness differently, watch the next video.